Football. I'm Sebastian North, and today, very special day, end of 2020, and I went ahead and did my first actual interview, sort of just conversation with a friend of mine. His name's Ben Sipkoff, and one of my best friends. We played together in college, and he's one of the minds that I find most resourceful when it comes to just ideas about football. As a coach, he is someone who just understands the game and cares for it immensely. And so when it comes to loyalty, for me, there's not very many better people to talk to. So please enjoy the episode. It's an hour long. Hopefully, what we give you is something beneficial. Thanks so much. Enjoy. Today we're going to talk about loyalty, right, Ben? Go ahead. Introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Tell us who you are and why on earth I would actually ask someone like you to be on a show like this.
No worries. First of all, I just want to say, I'm really proud of you for doing this. This is a really cool thing. I've kept up and paid a little attention to the stuff that you've been doing and different stuff on Instagram and even the couple of things on Spotify that you've released so far. And I've really enjoyed them, particularly the music and the commentary that you're making. So I just want to congratulate you getting this stuff out there. It's really cool. I'm Ben Sipkoff. I work for a club in Maryland. They're called Soccer Association of Columbia, SAC. We play competitions all over the country, so you may have seen us at a local tournament. Hopefully you did. And then I have my own company, which is Pro Soccer Institute, PSI, which I run individual training and specialized training for teams and things along those lines in my area.
Sweet. And well, then the other thing is we're really good friends. Even though you're from Pennsylvania and I'm from Colorado, we both went to Goucher College, a hub of exceptional soccer lineage. Let's all be honest. D3 legends, if you've never heard of us,
flesh.
That is not surprising at all. So we played together. Ben, you're a goalkeeper. And still to this day, one of the best ones I've seen, despite being Leo Messi's size. Let's all as well. You're a coach, and the reason why for me, like bringing you on and having you really talking to you as a first guest, the reason why is because you are able to bring a nuanced perspective to the game, and you're one of the few people that I actually can stomach sitting and watching a game with, because no, really, I mean, I don't know how other people feel about this, but if I'm in a bar watching a game with people, I hear so much stuff that drives me nuts that I either have to get pasted or leave. It's one or the other, or else I'm just going to get in an argument with someone. And so when I've watched games with you, it's always fun because we can talk about the tactics, the intricacies, and neither one of us is trying to just throw people under the bus and just say they suck, because we're also wise enough to know that we didn't make it. We weren't good enough to get there. So that to me is a major point of this, is these aren't just celebrities. These are craftspeople who have done something better than us, really. And so the whole concept of loyalty in this is to me, it's, do we have loyalty for the game itself, right? And then I just want us to sort of dive into all the little things that make us question, how loyal are we to this game that's supposed to bring us joy? And how do we kind of turn it against ourselves, right? And use it as a tool to be upset and angry. And by doing that, in something that I was talking to Celia, my partner, about, if you criticize someone else's value system, you're basically just indicting your own, right? It's kind of like the idea that similar to the idea that bullies only bully because they hate themselves, kind of thing, right? So if we just get rid of all our loyalty for this game, what are we holding on to personally for ourselves? What's the value system? Why, right? So I want to open it up to you here and ask you sort of, what are the things that kind of trigger you on this whole entire thing? And what have you seen over the course of your fandom as not just a soccer fan, but also a United fan, because you're a Manchester United fan.
Yeah,
And
I got to bring that up, I guess. Yeah,
well, you're Ferguson, early Ferguson era. So loyalty at a club level and a managerial level, you've seen it displayed in a way that over the years in a really cool way. So go for it. I want to hear just all kinds of things you think.
To your point earlier about seeing being able to have conversations about treating these athletes as though they are artists in some ways, craftsmen. I think that's very understated, particularly in our culture. We tend to look at a celebrity or a player of even a high level. They don't have to necessarily be a Ronaldo level to be mythicized, if you will. Right. So what I love this quote by Van Persie, Robin Van Persie, who was actually, his parents were, I believe, both artists, or maybe it was just his mother. I can never quite remember if his dad was an artist or a professor, but I believe his mother was an artist. And he references the runs that he makes on the field as paint strokes of a paintbrush, and that his touches are the highlights to that paint stroke, and that his goals are the accentuations and the full picture that he's painting for his fans, and I try to look at every player with that same sort of ideology, that these are artists in the same way I like to think of myself as an artist when it comes to coaching. I have a vision, just like a painter does sitting in front of a canvas. And I want that vision to come to fruition. Only my paint and my tools are my players, and totally. My practice sessions are me refining the technique of using my players, So when I step to a field, I try to look through it through those eyes, and it helps in a lot of ways to remove me from thinking of them as gods or sort of mythologized creatures that are doing something of fantasy that is unachievable or unrecognizable to me.
That's an interesting point. Yeah.
And then to talk about the
well, hold on.
I wanted to
ask, because what you just said is really interesting. You're basically saying that, like, when we start to elevate these humans who are excellent craftspeople as gods, now we can just take shots at them because they're gods.
Exactly,
they're invincible.
Right.
We can just
we dehumanize them in that action.
We dehumanize them by elevating them, which is weird.
Exactly.
That's so sordid and twisted, isn't it?
Right. Well, it's I think it's human nature, because it's very tough for us as human beings to cope with our inabilities, our inconsistencies, our for instance, I'm 5'5", and yes, I played at a high level. I even had a tryout for a semi-professional indoor team. Didn't go my way because I'm 5'5", But so I have certain things that prevented me, some out of my control, some in my control, from being able to be a professional soccer player. So when I look at a professional soccer player, I can either say, oh, they're not human and that's why they're a professional, which then relieves me of my responsibility and my failure, right, to become a pro athlete.
Totally.
Right? Or I can look at them as a human being and try and take pieces of them to make myself and better myself on my own journey without being in comparison to this craftsman who happens to have made it to a level where he's able to show off his skills in this way, which I think as a fan, we need to start to get back to a sense of admiration for these people, a sense of, you're giving us a gift of entertainment on a given day. And that doesn't come, it's not lost on me, and I'm sure it's not lost on you as members of the community, the massive amount of sacrifice that these people have to make to give us that gift of being able to watch them perform at this high level. Yep. We all excuse actors for maybe being a little bit on edge or a little bit avant-garde or a little bit eccentric, right? And maybe even having an edge, right? We excuse that
Or
because, oh, it's
being in a
required to be
terrible
an
movie.
actor. But we don't allow our pro athletes to have a bad day, you know, to show up with their hamstring a little bit tight and just say, I can either go out there and give a 50% performance or I can sit the bench, right? Well, neither one of those options are options that fans will accept, and that's unreasonable as a fan. You know, we have to get back to a place of admiration as opposed to a place of mytholization. I'm not saying the word's not correct, but of mytholizing them, you know, of turning them into gods.
Yeah. Well, so, and honestly, everything you're saying is bringing a certain name to mind for me. Wayne Rooney.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
first of all, and we talked about this. We've talked about this before. It's something that, and I just want to say this, for Wayne Rooney, for me, is like this, like, pivotal moment in football history, like, for me, because he's a week older than me. And I remember watching that game, the Arsenal Everton game, where he scored that insane goal.
Yeah, from like 40 yards out. It was unbelievable.
Well, to 25. But either way, it was just, I was like, oh, he's my age.
Yeah.
I'm not going to make it. That's it. My dream of becoming a professional soccer player ended with Wayne Rooney scoring against Arsenal.
Right.
That was it for me. And what it was not like this despair, but it was like, wow, respect. If that's what it takes, I know now. I've been checked hard.
Yes.
And then, so for me, like, he was so pivotal in that way. He was so iconic for me personally. And I thought he was brilliant. And honestly, I've never thought otherwise about Wayne Rooney. But a guy who is the record goal scorer for Manchester United and England.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people actually really consider him an all-time great.
Yeah.
And
I'd like to note, hold on one second. I'd like to note too, all-time goal scorer for England, played out of position for at least his last 2 years for England.
Sure, yeah.
And still number one goal scorer for England.
Yeah.
And played out of position.
And so, you know, when we talk about demonizing people that we bring up, I think what happened with Wayne Rooney's career, the fact that people still ask themselves, did he achieve his full potential? It's like, dude, just like put together a list of things that he accomplished from when he started to where he ended. And it's amazing, right? It's an incredible thing. So why are we so disloyal to Wayne Rooney? Why do we dog him? And you as a United fan, I mean, I'd love to hear the perspective on what United fans think of, like, why your record goal scorer is not your legend, right? He's just someone that, he did well, but he didn't achieve his full potential. Like, how on earth is that possible?
Well, I think you nailed it right on the head. It's the idea of expectation, right? If I walk into a room and my expectation is that that room will be filled with gold and it's filled with silver instead, then I'll be disappointed, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's what it comes down to with him, is that he was running with a nation and in so many ways a very soccer critical nation, with like their hopes and dreams on his shoulders. Any failure, meaning anything less than a World Cup victory, was going to lead to a scapegoating of him, and I mean, and I think that happens, to be honest with you, I think that's becoming a systemic, issue in, I think, soccer worldwide, but particularly European soccer. You see it at a managerial level, you see it at a player level. The idea that these people are interchangeable playing cards, only there to make a quick buck, is, I think, personally counterproductive and monetarily counterproductive as well. I mean, I don't think it can be good for the economics of these clubs to be firing or to be, paying out contracts or letting contracts run with players sitting on benches or in reserves behind politics as opposed to performance, and I think that the idea of expectation in that realm is what is allowing for this to kind of fester and even really populate. is, oh, well, I bought you for $50 million. You're not living up to your $50 million value because I had an expectation set for that $50 million.
Right.
Even though, let's say that guy shows up and he was playing a false nine system at his last club, right? Brought to a new club, asked to play a dual system with a striker, right? Because the manager thinks, oh, well, he was already playing in that receded role, so he'll just link up with this guy. I think it'll work out fine. And they just never build chemistry.
Right.
Maybe they don't like each other off the field. Maybe they don't, what it could be a variety of different things, right? So all of a sudden, that guy you bought from $50 million that you had an expectation of scoring 16 goals in your season, right, isn't living up to his expectations of scoring 16 million goals. And it becomes easy for that to become a numbers game instead of a human evaluation of what's going on. Let's actually look at the analytics and the tactics necessary for success before we immediately kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you
Totally.
will.
Did you hear what Mourinho said about stats a couple weeks ago?
I did not.
It's such a good
interestingly
quote.
enough, I breezed past an interview with him, and I believe it was
he dropped a one-liner that was just Mourinho style excellence. He said stats are like badly cooked meat.
Yeah.
Stats are like eating badly cooked meat. And it's they're so shallow. There's nothing in them. Like, stats tell a story, but there's also a flip side to every statistic. So if you want to say that someone had 25 assists this season, you can also be like, well, where are the goals? Or they weren't the person setting up. They weren't the person setting up the person to assist, right? Like, every single stat, you can look at a light side and a dark side of it. And if we get drawn into looking at stats, like you said, we just lose all visual of the humanity aspect, right? And when you were talking about sacking managers, so here's a funny thing. You being a United fan, and me being a Chelsea fan, we have seen complete opposite methods of how to treat a manager in our time. Because Ferguson could have been sacked who knows how many times in the last over the course of his career, where they were sixth at Christmas and they ended up winning the league, right? And then they stuck with him for years and he kept winning, kept rebuilding teams. And then I'm a Chelsea fan. I'm sitting here. It's like Carlo Ancelotti wins the double. Next season, they go through a really tough 2-3 months where they drop off. They almost come back and win the title. Nope, fired because they lost at United, and that was the decisive game. Yeah. I mean, the amount of managers. Roberto Di Matteo wins the Champions League with Chelsea. He's fired within 4 months because they start the season poorly. Yeah. If you want to look at a loyalty to managers, Chelsea is one of the most hilariously terrible clubs for it. And maybe, and I don't know, maybe started a culture in England of really judging managers way too quick. And so what I'm hoping with Frank Lampard is this kind of comes full circle and the club realizes we can't just can people. But the funny thing is now we're at United, who went through 2 decades of stability and loyalty in every aspect. I mean, loyalty is what you associated with Man United during the Ferguson era. That's the word for it. And now it's gone. Right now, everyone just wants to sack a club legend, even though he's doing well. So I want to hear your views now, because I think the polarization of those two clubs, it's so funny. And also it just, I mean, Man United, to me, really is, they were the definition of loyalty under Ferguson. So what's your perspective on that? And
I mean, they are, right? I mean, I still think in so many ways they are, I mean, they're convincing Pogba to stay, they're doing something to rebuild that sort of, that idea of loyalty to the badge, and it's actually interesting that you brought up the Chelsea story about Ancelotti. I was just reading an article by Lucas Besters. I just brought it up on my screen, so if you see my eyes darting.
Sure, yeah.
And I believe it was corroborated with Van Ours and Van Tulgi, but I could be getting both those names horribly incorrect.
No worries.
And it's entitled Effectiveness of In-Season Manager Changes in English Premier League Football. And one of the case studies they look at is that transition of Ancelotti. And using data, they basically said, that was an ineffective change. It while there was some impact initially, right, it ended up balancing it out. So all the club ended up doing was spending unnecessary money to pay out Ancelotti's contract, right? Which puts the club at a deficit, financially, because now they're paying two manager contracts, So it's interesting because when you really look at what the data is saying about this sort of disloyal behavior, it's actually costing these clubs significant amounts of money with no positive effect.
Right.
So when I look at something like being a Manchester United fan, I have to, give some credit to the idea that Ferguson is built an environment of loyalty that has led to the 30 years of international T-shirt sales domination of Manchester United. And I think we could steer back that way with managers like Solskjaer, managers like Lampard, who really could effectuate this sort of long-term managerial job safety, but
Totally.
in fact, actually, even in the article I read, but in the article I was just talking about, they say at the end of it that, they kind of just discuss, well, what are the reasons then? Because if the financial department is saying, hey, don't do this, it's going to cost us money, this hurts us, this actually hurts us, then why are they really firing these guys, right? And what they found was that most of the time, it's one of two situations. It's a proactive firing, meaning the club owners do it to save face with their fan base, right? Oh, we've slipped 6 games, we're struggling, right? Let me turn on the coach and scapegoat the coach, and that'll protect our fan base and in effectuation protect our stock prices.
Right.
Which is where their bottom lines more or less lie. And then the other one is inevitable firings. And this has to be taken into mind when we're talking about this idea of loyalty. So I really want to talk about it because I think this sort of idea of an inevitable firing is really the beginning of where the change needs to happen, right?
Okay.
Like, we're hiring managers and not even giving them transfer windows, right? So we're saying, hey, we expect you with the squad picked by this guy we just fired to make things happen. Well, that doesn't make any logical sense, right? So that to me becomes one of these things of like, well, those are the areas where we've got to start to say, hey, maybe we don't fire that guy. Like, I have in my notes here, what's his name? That took over for Reed. Alan Reed, who took over at Alan Reed, I think. I probably got his first name wrong. But he took over for Leeds after O'Leary spent that like $100 million in the transfer window, and they bought terrible players and lost like 6 games in a row and were in a relegation trouble.
Was it Peter Reed?
It might be Peter Reed. That sounds correct. Again, I could be wrong. But anyway, when he took over for Leeds, so O'Leary had spent $100 million in a transfer window and bought players that were all individually very talented but couldn't get along. They couldn't play together.
Yeah.
Put himself in relegation trouble. They fire him. They hire Reed. Reed comes in, right? Wins, I believe, 7 of 9 games. Yes? When they had to win 9 of 9 to not be relegated.
Oh,
And he gets fired. Yeah. He gets fired in the summer transfer window. Right? They let Reed go because the team still got relegated.
That's a good example.
That's one of these situations that's an inevitable firing. Right? That attitude has to change. You didn't even give that guy a chance. And that's when I think about loyalty, and when I think about,
you gave him a chance, and he actually used it well.
Oh, I'm sorry. What did you say?
I was saying you gave him a chance. He actually delivered, but he didn't perform the impossible miracle.
The expectations.
Right.
He didn't deliver the expectations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to bring that back to Manchester United, I'm actually really, really proud of us because I think our board may be one of the only ones out there at the top level that's acknowledging some of the ridiculousness because they got forced to trade managers so quickly. You know, I mean, they just signed Solskjaer to a new contract. You know, he's sitting second in the Premier League. They just signed him into 4 years. Now, I mean, the unfortunate things, there's only a $7 million buyout clause in the end of the contract, so they could fire him at any second. But
Right.
it shows, hey, we gave you a shot. You weren't doing well. We had faith in you when you weren't doing well, and now you are successful. Who knows where we'll finish? Maybe we'll get relegated, but I doubt it. You know, I think we'll probably finish in the top 5. So you got to give the guys some credit, and that credit should be rewarded with job security. You know,
Yeah.
not more money, which effectively causes less job security at a managerial role.
Mm-hmm.
If you're making $20 million, it's almost cost beneficial for the club to fire you and hire a $10 million manager than it is for them to keep you around.
Interesting.
You know?
That's an interesting point. The idea that it's not really about how much money you put behind someone; it's about how much faith you put behind someone, and how much. Yeah, you
right.
know,
I think
one
right
thing.
Now, I think right now it's how much money they're putting. I think it's being driven by how much money they're putting behind the managers.
Totally.
And I think it needs to transition to, you know, if there's something to take away from the old game. You know, you and I have talked many times about, like, God, if we have to listen to one more guy talk about how the old game is the real successful game, right? If there is one thing we can take away from it, it's that idea of loyalty to managers and to players, which disseminates the players then.
Yeah.
You know, if your manager's not walking around being terrified about being sacked, you're not walking around being terrified of being sacked.
Totally.
Which means you give everything you have every game to the club and to the badge because they're giving it back to you in job security. You know?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point you just made. Actually, is that there's an idea that players don't seem to care, that the manager's going to go and they'll still be there. But people, in a way, that's true. You get rid of the manager, you can't get rid of the whole team. But there are a lot of players whose career went just descended all because the manager that brought them to a club got sacked. The new one came in and didn't like them. And then nothing ever worked out. They never played for a team where it all clicked, and it just. And so sometimes when you fire a manager, you actually debilitate half your squad if it's the wrong thing. One thing that you mentioned, you said inevitable firings. So there's 2 names that jumped into my mind, and these are 2 different types of sackings that happened. So the first one is Nigel Atkins. He was the manager of Southampton when they came back into the Premier League like a decade ago, right?
Yeah.
And they were playing some good stuff. They were scoring goals. Like, they were pretty exciting to watch, but they took some beatings as well. They kind of looked like Norwich last season, right?
Yes.
And somehow mid-season, they're doing fine. They're they're gonna be in a relegation battle probably because they're a promoted club, but they're doing well. I mean, and out of nowhere, they sack Nigel Atkins.
Yeah.
And they bring in Mauricio Pochettino, who at the time spoke very little English and needed an interpreter in interviews. So the English press was like, you've just fired this guy who got you promoted. You've spent 4 months in the Premier League. You don't look like you're going to go down necessarily. And you've just gotten rid of this guy. This is totally disloyal. And people were right to be upset about it. Funny thing is, the president came out and was like, the important thing is to make the change when you see that problems are coming, not to wait for the problems to arrive. We didn't think that this was going to be sustainable for the season, so we brought in Mauricio. Well, hindsight says that was a very good decision because Southampton have never looked back. You know, they've had good managers since, and they're a club that is so stable looking as a Premier League outfit right now. And you know, that's an interesting show of like cutthroat, disloyal, that we don't care, we're getting rid of you, and it panned out. So there is that side of it where you can see why people do that. Then the other one, this is my favorite one on the flip side, David Moyes. right, takes over
Yes,
at West
yes.
Ham, right, and then
Yeah.
gets fired at the end of a season after keeping them up,
Yeah.
saved them
Yeah.
from
After
relegation. They were
doing an incredible job.
all right, David Moyes, you're boring, and Man United fired you. We can't possibly have a Man United reject. We'd rather have a Man City reject. So let's hire Manuel Pellegrini,
Yeah.
fire him, and then bring you back, David Moyes.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and now West Ham are doing excellent. And so it's just such a hilarious story of like, you really got to do it right and think it through. And I think what Southampton did was maybe cutthroat and harsh, but they had a clear plan, a very obvious plan for what they wanted. And they knew that Mauricio Pochettino would be good. Getting rid of Moyes to bring in Pellegrini was literally just like, okay, we need to look. We're going to change our style. We're going to be an exciting team to watch. We're going to challenge for Europe, even though we just barely avoided relegation. Now we're going to bring in Pellegrini. Everything's going to get rosy. And, you know, where is the value system in terms of the choice that West Ham made? And you see them having to go all the way back on it. And again, like I said with Chelsea earlier, it's like, went through how many managers? I mean, the list is insane from when Abramovich took over.
Oh my
and
gosh,
where are we right now? We're
Yeah.
with a guy who played for the club for years, who is bringing up academy players. And it's like, how do we get full circle? Oh, value systems. Like, if you make these choices with like a real human, like, consideration, it will probably work better than if you use the financial consideration. Right. And I think the point you made about how it's more efficient to spend less money on your manager overall, because you will just create more a sense of loyalty. And I think, man, Ferguson, it looks like everything that his entire ethos, it's at least kept somewhat alive by Ole being there and by the club saying, no, we're sticking by him, even though, right. You know, it's a show. It's like, that's like, you know, people, we're choosing to be loyal.
Right.
How does that make you feel? Right.
Right. And I think too that there's like an element of that then perpetuates throughout your club. Right. Like, it was hard to be a Manchester United fan for the last 7 years. You know, it was, because we'd been on top for so long. People had just been waiting, salivating to jab us repeatedly over and over again for every little thing. And I can't blame them. Can't blame them at all. That's the benefit of being on top for 20 years is maybe we got to suffer some of the downside. But I mean, I have personal friends, not many, thank gosh, but some that jump ship.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that became Tottenham fans, or they became Liverpool fans, or even Man City fans. You know, and I have to look at that guy and I have to say, how can I blame you? We went through 4 different managers in 3 years, right? None of which put us in relegation trouble. None of which, you know what I mean, in almost every situation but 2 or 3 years, we qualified for Europe. You know, it was, again, one of those situations that was, we're going to set unreasonable expectations. Yes. And then if you don't meet those unreasonable expectations, we're going to make you very, very scared. And that idea of fear pushing sales seems silly to me. And I mean pushing sales and the idea that fear, while initially a very strong motivator, right? If I walk into a room and I say to somebody, I'm going to fire you tomorrow unless you get your 2 hours of work done today, there's a real good chance on that day that guy will get those two hours of work done, right? But if I do that every single day to that guy for a month straight, by the first of the next month, he's probably going to be like, man, you know, come fire me, man. Bring it.
Or just do terrible work.
Because the pressure of walking around thinking you're going to lose your job all the time affects your performance.
Mm-hmm.
It affects your ability to go out and try new things. Like, one of the things that I love right now about Manchester United's actual soccer is they're creative again for the first time in 7 years. You know, they have a breadth of creativity. Bruno Fernandes, Paul Pogba's long balls, Domine coming out of the midfield with the surges. there's this sense of we're not afraid to fail, right? And if you take the Wolves game as an example of what that brings to the table, that essence of we're not afraid to fail, you start getting results like you do in that Wolves game where we score goals in the last couple of minutes of games to win them. And you know who that reminds me of is the era of Ferguson. That's what made Manchester United untouchable in that era, was it didn't matter if there was 10 seconds left and we had the ball on our 18. We could score a goal and win a game.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that in itself, I think, only comes from loyalty. Because would Bruno Fernandes try to get a little nick on the ball to send it through, you know, praying that Rashford was still, or I think it was Rashford who scored it, was still on sides, you know? Would he have dared to do that at a club like, let's say like Man City, who are a little bit more fluid in the way that they're moving players around and where they maybe feel, I mean, Man City's got a fairly good loyalty base, but maybe feel a little bit more unsettled, you know, because Pep isn't quite as there, if that makes sense.
Look,
you know, not that he's not there, not that he's not doing good things, but it's sort of like if Manchester City doesn't achieve everything, Pep might lose his job. Right. Which means if Pep brought you into the club, you might lose your job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's to ignore the fact too that cost Manchester City and just coaching staff like, you know, $200 million over 4 years or whatever. You know, and that's not even counting the let's say 1-2 players that total $15 million are also now sitting the bench because the new manager that comes in doesn't want to play.
I mean, as a Chelsea fan, I don't even, the list of those is incredibly long. It's incredibly long. And, you know, I think one interesting thing you were like saying earlier that some fans jump ship. It's so incredible because to me as a Chelsea fan, like I've been a Chelsea fan pre-Abramovich era. So I'm going to make that clear. I've been a Chelsea fan since, you know, I remember that once they lost in the Europa League to Viking Stavanger. If you've ever heard of that club and maybe even seen them on FIFA or something, I remember when that happened. And I was like, oh, this is quite embarrassing. You know, getting beat by Trosmo in the snow in Norway. It's like, these were things that were happening at Chelsea. Club was in a really, really desperate state. And then Abramovich comes in and just changes the entire face of English football.
Yeah.
But ever
football
since,
as a whole, right?
I mean, definitely.
Yeah.
And ever since, I've seen more and more Chelsea fans, right? And we live in the United States. So fans here, you always, you kind of wonder, why did you choose your club? Like, we didn't grow up in the backyard, so we had to choose some way, right? My family's from, my dad's side of the family's from Southwest London. Chelsea's right in the backyard. I probably could be a Fulham or Brentford fan as well in terms of like locale. But, you know, sometimes I'm like, why did you choose City? Or why did you? And then I realize people are just, they want to love a team, but a lot of people, because they're not so like loyal to the sport and the game and the overall feel of it, they don't want to go through the heartache of watching your team play like crap or lose.
Right.
Like they don't want, and I mean, it sucks when Chelsea lose a game. I really have to like I have to I'm like, okay, I like cope, right? I have got coping mechanisms to not be even remotely grouchy, to just be like, okay, that was it. That's what happened. I'm moving on. And it's something that we put on ourselves as fans. Now, if you decide I don't want to feel an ounce of disappointment because of the expectation that I put that wasn't met, and that's on me, it's my expectation, right? It's not theirs. It's my expectation was not met. I'm upset. How do I deal with that, right? Yeah. I don't say, you know, I'd just rather be a Liverpool fan right now. Salah's great. You know what? I'm going to just take this off and go and grab my shirt that says Carlsberg on it, you know? And to me, like probably one of the biggest reasons why Liverpool's current like dominance is so magical for so many people is because it took so long to come back to the top. And fans who who
Yeah.
witnessed the last title win in the old First Division, and now seeing this, they're like looking at people who started becoming Liverpool fans 4 years ago and going, you have no idea.
Yeah.
You know how embarrassing it was for the club when Benitez came out and was like, facts, and just went at Ferguson, and Ferguson was like, you're done, bro. We're going to win the title now. That was horrible for Liverpool. And then the way they lost the title in the Brendan Rodgers year, when Chelsea went and just, pissed in the punch, basically. And there's Gerrard slip. I mean, Liverpool fans have had to go through it. And if you are a Liverpool fan who went through it for all these years, the payoff now is sweet, real sweet. And if you're a Man United fan who, you were a, Ferguson era United fan, you watch Moyes come in, they get rid of him in 6 months, 8 months, 7 months.
I think 8 months. Yeah.
And then they turn to Van Gaal and get rid of him, and then they turn to Mourinho, who I thought did pretty well. Get rid of him.
I thought did fantastic
because it didn't fit what again, the expectation. They wanted it to look like Ferguson's United.
Right.
Well, Mourinho's United will never look like Ferguson's United. It could potentially be really successful, but it won't ever look the same.
Yeah.
And maybe they struck gold here by going with the loyal option of Ole, because it looks like a Ferguson era United. It just does. And I think in a way, like, to bookend that idea, right? If you go with the humanely loyal option, it just has a better option of panning out. You talked about paying 2 managers at once. You know, when Chelsea fired Conte, you know why he wasn't in management for a whole year?
No.
Because if he had taken a job at another club, his contract with Chelsea would have been ruptured and they wouldn't have had to pay him. He literally just was like, nope,
I'm good. Yeah.
And he got in touch with Inter. He's like, end of the season. I'll sign the contract on July 1st because on June 30th, my contract with Chelsea ends.
Yeah.
I mean, we got a title out of the guy. But, I mean, I'm more stoked about the fact that he brought the back 3 to England. That's other than that, Antonio Conte was just like this flashpoint as a Chelsea fan. To me, it's like this Lampard era feels the best in years. This feels the best on a humane level. If we don't win a title with Lampard, fine. What has happened in this is the feel-good factor of last season and this year as a Chelsea fan. And I assume as a United fan, it's probably similar, right?
Yeah. Well, we were even talking a couple of months ago when Manchester United was sitting in like 7th and 8th place. And you and I were talking about the fact that it almost reminded us, even in his strategy, in terms of his like periodization for the season. It reminds us of like early Ferguson to mid-era Ferguson, who would almost throw games away, right? To save players' legs and things like that to make a late season push, you know? And after December, they would just go on runs that were unheard of, you know, where they'd lose 2 games, 1 game, all of the first half of the year, you know? It was very impressive to watch in that time, and I feel that now with Solskjaer. Now, again, for all I know, we don't live in his head. You know, for all I know, he's not thinking about anything like that. But when I watched them, taking that game again, particularly the Wolves game, there was just a fluidity, a counterattacking nature, this freedom of play. It just reminded me of that Ferguson era, and it reminded me of almost you could almost feel that the players felt content in their role at the club. You know, even Pogba, who's been open about, you know, some discontent at the club, felt good in that game. Like, you could tell he was moving with everybody. He was connecting well. He was making great decisions in relationship to team, you know, to the team tactics and things along those lines. So I think when you focus too much on the immediate results, you ignore someone's ability to grow, right?
Absolutely.
And if we're ignoring someone's ability to grow, then we're never going to continue to move forward, right? We're always going to be in a sense of regression because we'll never move past that person will never grow beyond that level, if you will.
Totally.
You know? And I think that we're there in a lot of ways. I even see it in a lot of ways at the youth level, you know, where you've made the top team at your club, and you have these expectations of performance out of that top team at your club, when in reality, that performance you may not be capable of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like at a youth level, we're only capable of doing what the players that we have available to us can do.
Right.
You know, so if I pick up a team that I think is a very talented team, and in comparison to the players that came out to try out and to play at the club are a very talented group of players, right? But then I go throw them into the deep end, and they play the top 10 teams in the country every single weekend, right? There's a good chance that they may not be successful. Does that mean that team that they have failed? No. It means that our initial expectations of them were set too high and have to be reevaluated.
Right.
You know, it has actually very little to do with what they've done as a performance, the players themselves as a performance, and has more to do with our personal expectations of what that performance is supposed to be.
Well, and the scary thing is the people watching the professional game and the disloyalty that exists there, and just being like, oh, that's the way it should work at the youth level too.
Exactly.
And that, especially when you're talking about people who are young, right? Like anyone under the age of 18, from 4 all the way to 17. If you are like, look, the Pandora's box of like dysfunctionality in the way we treat young players and the way we build expectations of them is, I mean, that's a whole other thing. But also,
it could be a whole episode unto itself.
It's a 20 episode series, right? But I think one of the interesting things is, like, you know, we see it a lot at the youth level is, you know, there's the tryout tourists, right? The people that hit up every tryout they can over the court to just see where they'll end up on which team, taking spots away from other people. With no intention of joining a club, and then people who just like, they didn't make the top team, so they go to that club for this season. At my club, at Rapids Youth Soccer, there's players who I have seen come and go from the club almost 3 or 4 times in the last 5 years. Like, you know, I mean, you want to talk about cost? How many different uniforms did you buy?
Right.
How many different clubs' uniforms? Like, how much effort and like driving and all this stuff did you do to eventually just come back to the same team 2 years later, 3 years later? And to teach young people that level of disloyalty, it worries me for football fandom, because if you look at kids and you're like, now we can, and clubs and like the way we operate at a grassroots level, if you can toss that aside, how are you going to treat these people that you turn into mythological creatures, into gods?
Right.
Zero humanity. If you can't treat humans with humanity, people that you deify, they don't have a chance. They don't stand a chance.
Yeah. And I think it starts from that. I mean, I really do. I mean, you know, I don't want to get too much into, you know, it's a soccer podcast. We don't have to get too much into, you know, social media or anything along those lines, but we're only adding more and more levels of disconnection between us, which allows for more and more dehumanization of people. Totally. You know, and we like to, which I find very interesting, is psychologically, we think if we elevate someone, that's an acceptable level of dehumanization, and it is not. You know, like, I just want to specify that just because we're elevating them and giving them praise, the second we stop looking at them as humans doing something for us, you're performing for us, is when that disloyalty becomes almost instantaneous. Yeah. It becomes so easy, right? That it's almost hard for me to stand in judgment of that. And then I do see it disseminate the whole way through the youth culture. And I feel sometimes for players when a parent comes to me and says, my kid's going to be a professional soccer player, why aren't you doing this, or this for this kid? And I have to think in the back of my head, I've worked with some extremely high-level players, and I don't know if your kid's going to be a pro player or not, right? But I do know that with what I'm doing, I'm giving him the best chance I'm capable of giving him to get there, right? Yet I'm being held to standards and expectations as a coach by that parent who expects this of me, right, to make their kid a professional player, right? When in reality, I'm not even really aware of what their standards are, what their
Yeah,
expectations of me are.
totally.
Like I'm just out there doing the best for the player, right? And that again goes back to this sense of loyalty, right? Like how easy it is for a parent to think that the coach is there for them and not there for the player,
Right.
right? My job is to be there for the player, right? And every time that I have done that in my life, which I like to believe is the vast majority of the kids that I've dealt with, things have turned out very well. And any time that I've thought about the parent first, it has almost always led to a situation of mess, confusion, and disappointment.
So then if
You
a
know?
professional club decides to hire or fire, or to fire a manager or keep a manager based on what is being said on social media, right?
Right.
That's kind of the equivalent of you know, making coaching decisions based on what you think the parents want to
Exactly.
see. That's the same as when, I mean,
Exactly.
recently I heard at halftime I keep doing this, NBCSN, their
MSNBC.
no, NBCSN.
MSNBC.
No. MSNBC is the news network. NBCSN is the sports. So
Oh, sorry.
it's a problem. We keep doing that. Acronyms just mess with you. So
Yeah.
they like a few weeks ago at halftime of a game, it was halftime of the Merseyside derby, because Virgil van Dijk injury had happened, right?
Right.
The Rebecca Lowe and the commentators, they actually spent time talking about what was being said on social media. And they're like, social media is really upset about this. Social media is upset about everything.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
stop for 1 second. We need to remember that we have the responsibility. I can go on social media and be a troll, or I can go and be maybe a peacemaker, someone who just wants to say nice things. I don't have to be mean. I don't have to be disloyal. I can choose to use these platforms and these things for good. I can. And if you're a coach, if you're running a club, maybe you can look at your manager and say, we choose something for the good. And look, Arteta, 2 wins in a row right now. They could have fired him right before the Chelsea game.
Yeah.
Who would they put in? I don't know. But like, and I truly believe that guy's going to get them out of this mess. I don't think that it's going to be I don't think that they're actually in real collapse crisis mode. I don't. And I think that the fact that Solskjaer was given time and he's now in second, Arteta gets 2 wins on the bounce. Last season, Frank Lampard, everyone said he was terrible.
Right.
Look,
it's a great
whether
point.
you believe it or not, and then Dean Smith at Villa. Last season, I'd be honest with you, that looked like a very average English team to me.
Yeah.
The changes that they made post-lockdown, I mean, they saved themselves from relegation because the coaches got together and were like, how are we going to finish the final 13 games, solid up our defense, and keep it together? They did that. They stuck with Dean Smith. He got the team working. They stuck with players that were working hard and that were giving for the club. Now, Jack Grealish doesn't even look like he's going to want to sign for anyone else at the moment. Looks like he's having a ball at Villa. And Jack Grealish got relegated with the club. Everyone's like, he's too good for the club. Get him out. He's stayed with them. And now look at where Jack Grealish is with Villa. Again, yes, making changes can work. Like we talked about the Southampton thing. But there is no price for what you can get with loyalty, right? It is absolutely priceless. And I don't know. I mean,
think that I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go for it.
I think something to end on would be the idea that loyalty without evaluation is also senseless. Totally. I really want to be clear that I'm not advocating for blind loyalty. What I'm advocating for is realistic expectations that incorporate the full realm of what is going on as opposed to the data that shows a win or a loss on a table.
Right.
You know, and if we can get to the point where we're making logical, sensible decisions that incorporate more than, for instance, I think you're absolutely right. I think sometimes clubs are making decisions based on social media and how they think that what social media is going to indicate in their stock prices, right, then affects their decisions in office. And that to me is the disconnect. You know, now if it is actually affecting stock prices,
Or
right,
ticket sales.
and that guy, right, and that manager is not doing their job, right? Let's say he's off golfing every day, or he's not setting his sessions up right, or he's off, you know what I mean? Or the O'Leary thing where he drops $100 million, right, for Leeds, buys none of the players that he needs to be successful, then goes out and proves that he has not been successful. That's not an idea of being disloyal to that guy. That's the idea you failed, man. You know, and we also have to, I think, become more comfortable with the idea of failure in our culture, which will help us with this idea of loyalty. Because I mean,
Totally.
I find even that at the youth level, how often I have to remind my 8 and 9-year-olds, I want to see mistakes out of you as a player, because it means that you're trying to push yourself to a higher and a higher and a higher level. You know, now if the mistake's happening all the time, then we talk about how to correct them. Yeah. But if they go to pull a scissors because they're trying to take a player on and beat them in a 1v1 and they mess up and they pull it too late, I don't want to come down. I don't pull that kid and sit him on my bench. I don't fire him from his job, right? Totally. I encourage the behavior of experimentation and acceptance of failure as a learning method. You know, we've talked before about how, too, there are levels of manager, like it requires certain levels of skill to be managers at different levels. And we're looking at some of these people and giving them no chance to understand the meta of the game at that level, which is different than the meta of, let's say, a game at the championship level, or even the difference between the meta of Champions League games and the meta of EPL games.
Right.
You know, they're played totally differently. They require different analytics, they require different data, and they require different tactics to be successful. But we're not giving managers chances to really solve the game and hopefully improve and evolve the game in solving it, right? Totally. Like Pep Guardiola did at Barcelona, you know, where
Talk about a loyalty option, right?
Changed the way we're going to play soccer for the rest of our lives, you know?
Absolutely.
Right? Like, or Ferguson did in the early 90s with the counterattacking game.
Well, remember, Barcelona chose Guardiola over Mourinho. Like, when they chose Guardiola, Mourinho was, you know, killing it at Chelsea. He was at the top. He wanted to come back, and they were like, you're winning, you're doing great. We want to go with really one of our totally.
We want to invest in someone that has what we agree with.
Exactly. And Mourinho was a Barcelona guy.
Yeah, yeah.
But Guardiola was just more. I mean, he really, I mean, you know, Mourinho's Portuguese. Guardiola's Catalan. He's from Barcelona.
Yeah.
And they went with that option. And the payoff, I mean, Zidane at Real Madrid, the payoff of these options. Yeah. No, you're totally right.
And that, totally mean, that idea that we can make investments in these things has to start becoming systemic, or I don't see personally, as a fan of the game, I don't see it going the direction I want. I see it becoming more and more and more litigious. I see it becoming more and more and more fair weather. Seeing less and less and less loyalty to managers, players, and fans. You know, we always want to talk about what clubs are always doing for fans and this and that. Maybe don't fire the guy that we've all loved for X amount of years. You know what I'm saying? Over nothing. You know, maybe don't listen to the bullies in our membership clubs and our fan clubs. Maybe don't listen to the bullies and back them, which to me feels disloyal to me. You know, because I'm not trying to bully people. I'm here to be a good fan that's been a fan of Manchester United for 33 or 32 years now. I was 3 years old when I got my first Manchester United jersey and saw them play and thought to myself, soccer's what I want to do with my life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was a highlight video of the 1992, a highlight video of the 1992 season.
Yeah.
You know, was when I decided this is what I want to do with my life. You know, so 30 years I've been a fan of Manchester United. And to me, when I see people getting sacked, I believed in David Moyes. And I think given the time that he might have been able to do something, you know, I did not believe in Van Gaal and I didn't believe in Mourinho, but I do believe in Solskjaer, you know, and I don't think Mourinho ever really, I don't think he was ever really going to be a Manchester United manager. He doesn't fit. He's a manager, for instance, that only wants to be at a club for 4 to 5 years. He doesn't want to be at a club forever.
He's also
Manchester United needs a manager that wants a decade. I'm sorry, what did you say?
I was saying Mourinho's excellent at being an underdog. He's really good at that. Yeah, so being at Spurs is perfect for him, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And two, if you've noted at Spurs, to speak to this idea of loyalty and to this idea of changing the locker room, changing the methodology of the club from the top down, right? The ideology and methodology. Mourinho has done that at Tottenham. Mm-hmm. You know, Mourinho went in there and said, you guys are going to become Mourinho's Tottenham from now on.
Right.
You're not going to be, you know, and to some degree, all of a sudden, he's got a team and a front of house staff that have his back.
Yeah.
And he can make decisions unilaterally that are beneficiary to the club in terms of money, right? He can make decisions about players without having to feel as though his job's going to be on the line at every second.
Right.
Right. Which has allowed him freedom to adapt to injury issues and make real changes that have been, I think, some of the most brilliant in at least last year's season. Yeah. You know, so again, looking back at this idea of when you make someone feel like they're comfortable, they will return that with long-term success. Maybe not immediate success, but long-term success. Totally. And that effectively will eventually disseminate the whole way through to the youth level, where all of a sudden you have players that are really fighting for their clubs. They're not jumping from one club to another. They're saying, I want to play for this club. I want to wear their badge. I want to win a national championship with SAC. I want to win a national championship with Rapids, right? And because if the guy jumps all the time, he's never going to understand the tactics of the team he's playing on. Right. He's not going to understand what the coach really wants, what the players around him really needs. You know,
and what loyalty is that to the game itself?
Exactly.
You're just doing something.
And that has to start from what we're seeing at the highest level, because that's what we all judge ourselves by. Mm-hmm. You know? Hey, man, this has been absolutely fantastic.
Awesome. Yeah, totally. No, really, really great. And just obviously happy New Year.
Yes, you too.
And look, 2020 was insane. And I think this year as a year, like everything that we've talked about here, just one thing I like to do with this game is extrapolate what I see here and just apply it to what I see in life and society. And, you know, football has given us so many lessons for life this year. Yeah. So go ahead, everybody, and just like think about those pieces, those loyalty pieces, and how like going into this new year, hopefully we don't get nailed by another pandemic or, you know, an actual meteor shower that crashes into Earth.
Yeah. But I can only assume the dinosaurs are coming back at this point.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. No. I mean, the government's already telling us that UFOs are, you know, a thing now. They're finally admitting it. So this is it's going to be a fun year. But no, let's all stick together and enjoy it. And Ben, like for personally between the two of us, you're one of my most loyal friends, and that's the reason why I thought that this topic is so good, because you're loyal to the game through and through. You're loyal to your players, and you have gone through your own evolution with this topic, and we all have. And I just think that your point of view on this has been top notch. Lovely.
Hey, thank you again, man, and right back at you. I love you, brother. Really easy to be your friend, pal. And I agree with you. I think I agree with the idea that I think you're a very loyal person as well. You know, so I think that this is going to be a very fun recording. I can't wait to hear it when it comes out.
Yep. Well, that's the plan. Get into it in a couple minutes once I pee.
Yeah, yep. Happy New Year, everybody.
Take it easy.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, man.